Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin.
Last video, we were talking about the connection between lengthening the spine and increasing the thoracic cavity, and how this relates to what Alexander calls the kinesthetic systems. So, you wanted to talk more about that today?
Yes, the subject is very vast, so we have to take a direction, follow it, and then maybe take another one. So, Alexander, so let's have a look at the sentence we started that from, and if it works, it does. So, Alexander mentioned increasing the thoracic capacity in nearly all his books. So this is a sentence. These two actions, the reeducation of the kinesthetic systems and the increasing of the thoracic capacity, which applies a mechanical power by means of the muscle and ribs to the straightening of the spine, are both aspects of the one central idea and are not separate and divisible acts. I want to come back to this idea of the need to eradicate the kinesthetic system. There is a lot of misunderstanding, I think, about what we mean by reeducation of the kinesthetic system or reeducation of the sensory appreciation. Sensory appreciation for Alexander is always related, like in the term kinesthetic. Kine in Greek is movements. And so the need of the reeducation of the kinesthetic system is going to become obvious to the students who are having lessons in the initial Alexander technique, because we film every session. In these sessions, the students are explained a new conception of the movements of the parts of different mechanisms. So the parts are rigid, bony parts of some mechanism. And we are showing, first of all, what it is the pupil is doing with these parts, what sort of movements is giving consent to when he's performing very simple actions like you could ask the student to sit on a chair, or if he's sitting, to stand from the chair. You could ask the student to make a step, or even to just reach forward with the hands to take hold of an object. When that is done, the film can be, in fact, studied. You will see I do apply some geometrical tools to the images of the film, and the pupil can see himself or herself moving in front of the camera. And that global movement, that general action, can be then analyzed. That is subdivided. We can see what is the different segments of the rib cage, what is the movement of these segments, what is the acceleration of the segments, which segment is faster than the other, in which direction they are they all going in the same direction or not. And very quickly, the pupil will start to understand that the shape, or you would say posture, in which they are seen performing simple acts as resting on a chair, are in fact the end results of these series of movements that they are performing without their knowledge. They are not aware of their actions as a concerted activity. They may be aware of difficulty in moving a shoulder. They be aware of some tension, I don't know, in the back or in the neck, anywhere. But this has nothing to do with the kinesthetic system. These are not systems for evaluating movements. Most of the time, the pupil does not evaluate coordinated movements. He may be able to evaluate a difficulty to move one part, but it's not what we are discussing when we talk about the reeducation of the kinesthetic systems. The interest we have is for coordinated movements. That is, segmental movements or movement of different segments of the mechanism that are happening at the same time. So the pupil is introduced to that new way to or new perspective, if you want, how to observe one's activity. That's the first step. The second step is that it's shown to the pupil that he has a certain capacity to consciously direct a few movements together. A few movements that are going to happen at the same time with different parts of the mechanism. In between these two fairly simple ideas, a complex teaching is going to start, where the pupil is starting to observe and question his own movements. He wants to discover whether the movements is coordinating habitually because of his sensory appreciation that has been developed by his past experience, whether these coordinated actions are fixed in the sense that they reproduce themselves all the time without his knowledge, or even when he knows about it. It's not because you know you have a tendency to pull the superior part of the torso and the neck back that suddenly you can decide to stop. Recordings are very important for that, because I have seen so many people that have thought that they had stopped to do unwanted action because they had been told they had stopped, or because they felt they had stopped, because they thought they had worked so much on it that they had stopped. And to discover then, with a video recording, that no, they did not. They were still doing it without any feeling, any kinesthetic awareness of the different movements that were appearing. And that kinesthetic awareness is not at a basic level, just at a basic level of feeling the movements. There is also kinesthetic blindness at observing how movements are linked together, how one movement that appears at one moment tends to appear never alone, but with other unwanted movements. So the blindness is not just some sort of sensory, incapacity to feel things. No, absolutely not. It's much more complex than this, and in some ways you could say it's much more intellectual than this. Well, it prevents the intellectual understanding to take place, because the person is going to think that if she felt the right thing, it would be nice, it would be good, she would be saved, when of course she would not. She would just simply believe a new sensory global feeling that that's it, she's fine. Very often people come to the Alexander technique, I would say to the modern Alexander technique, because they want to feel nice, they want to feel good, they want to feel secure, they want to feel complete. There is an enormous desire of the new student to feel better. And I was recently asked by a teacher of the modern Alexander technique if I refute the marketing of the modern Alexander technique that always claims that people are going to feel better because of the technique. If I do not make people feel better, what is going to, in fact, augment the desire of people to have lessons in the initial Alexander technique? Well, the answer is fairly simple, in fact. People have a thirst for knowledge, especially when it's knowledge about themselves and knowledge about their actions, knowledge of suddenly discovering some clear system to know whether they are changing in the right direction or not. It's not a change in the way they feel. It's a change about how they reason about their own activity and how they take control of that development, because it's a development. I'm not offering a simple solution, a quick fix or a magic button on which you have to press in order to become whole or to become a better version of yourself. Certainly not. We are discussing an exploration, how a person can start to realize what is really happening, realize that there may be a capacity to use verbal instructions in order to change how movements are linked together. Not change one movement or another, change how the movements are linked. So, of course, I follow this idea that the pupils are coming to have initial Alexander technique lessons, the lessons I give, or the lesson that the teacher that have been trained with me are giving. It's the idea of reeducating the kinesthetic system, and it's not a body type of practice. We are not changing people's feeling. We are the kinesthetic system in human beings is at a much higher level in our brains. It's not impression that we feel. It's how we reason, how we compose movements. That's how we conceive actions as coordinated sums. And so I do go by this reeducation of the kinesthetic system, and I do go by the absolute need of increasing the thoracic capacity, which applies a mechanical power by means of the muscle and ribs to the straightening of the spine. So the straightening of the spine does not come from a sudden revelation and or a desire, an intention of stopping the wrong. No. We do apply mechanical power by means of the muscles and ribs, or muscle tissues, or what I call fascias and ribs. And when we say ribs, you must understand that the mechanical power that we can apply can only be applied by means of the movements of the ribs. So you will see when we discuss increasing the thoracic capacity, of course, we do not discuss ribs as such, or ideas of ribs, or ideas. No, we discuss how different ribs can be directed in different directions, so that their movements apply a mechanical power to the straightening of the spine. That's it. So. Now that we've seen that, you must understand that when students start, they start with, psychomechanical defects that have been, really developed and described by F.M. Alexander. So we are going to explore something that is dear to me. It's the notion of vigor in action. This is how Alexander describes a person that has no idea of conscious guidance of series of action. He says that indulgence in harmful habits of feeding and posture have caused these same habits, through heredity and unconscious imitation, to become second nature in the great majority of adults of today, and frequently in children, even at an early age. The normal condition of vigor in the action of the component parts of the respiratory mechanisms is greatly interfered with. General nervous relaxation is brought about, and a feeble, flabby actions become permanent. Very often, when people do read these sentences, they see maybe too much in the preparation of the description by Alexander. And when we discuss the vigor in the action of the component part of the respiratory mechanism, most people do think that we are discussing breathing as such. And I don't think it's the case. You will see, I will try and demonstrate that, of course, the rib cage is, for Alexander, not a primary respiratory mechanism, but it's a primary postural mechanism. The rib cage is used to stabilize the spine. The rib cage can be used, as we've seen, to apply mechanical power to the spine, so that, for example, when you decide to lift an heavy object, there are things that you must understand about the coordination of the movement of the different parts of the rib cage, unless you are going to have great difficulty with your back, because the spine has never been designed to support the torso without any help, without any mechanical action coming from the ribs and coming from the fascia of the torso, of course. So when I start working with my students, you must understand that I do look at their habit of vigor in action in expanding the rib cage. So here you see one of my students. Well, it's not his first lesson. And as you can see, he's walking, but curiously, he's wearing a ruler against the sternum bone and behind his ear. This is a way for him to realize by observation, observing his own movements in action, to observe how the different parts of the rib cage have an influence, a great influence, on the direction of the neck, of course, and head, secondarily. So what we see here is that the component parts are used in a certain way, and we certainly see I've pointed the arrows, which show that to obtain that orientation of the ruler, it's clear on this picture that the superior part of the ruler is inclined backward, the inferior part is inclined forward, and this inclination of the ruler is due to the different movements that are in fact given consent to by the student when walking. We see that there is a tendency for the abdomen to protrude at the front. So inside this envelope, obviously, there is a mechanical object we call the rib cage. I've tried to draw this shape that is representing what the rib cage movement are and how they affect the posture. We see that the lower part of the rib cage is moving forward faster than the upper part of the rib cage. This man is moving with the abdomen forward. At the moment, I'm not considering the lower segments, the lower leg. We are just looking at the mechanism of the torso influence on, for example, the neck and head, because the neck and head are the start of the respiratory mechanism. The respiratory mechanism is not just concentrated in the torso. You obviously need some opening to the ambient air, and that is through, of course, the trachea, the larynx, the pharynx, and the mouth. So, as you can see, this person is walking and in some way is creating an obstruction of the airways, of the superior airways, by having the neck pulled back. I maintain that the neck is pulled back, not because the person is doing anything with the neck. The neck is pulled back because the upper torso is much further back than the middle torso. When we say there is a protruding abdomen, you must see that the lower sternum is much further forward than the top of the sternum. Therefore, we can say that the person is walking with a very flabby action of the mechanism of the arm. The arm is hanging back, yeah, and as a result, the upper torso is also back, and I can say that this person in walking is pulling the neck back. As a result of the neck being pulled back, it's obvious here that the head is not leading the way forward, that it's the abdomen. That person is walking with the abdomen forward. And the person has no conscious awareness of the movement is allowing with the middle torso, with the upper torso, or with the lower torso. It's happening when I walk. And if you ask the person to change the speed of the different movements of the parts, of the segmental parts of the mechanism, suddenly you will discover a great difficulty. A flabby action has a tendency to have consequences, in a sense that when you start exerting yourself in a different direction. That is, instead of having the abdomen forward in walking, you want to have the upper torso in walking, which means that you have to change the speed or the proportion of speed of the two extremities of the ribcage object. Suddenly, you're faced with a difficulty, with two sides. There is one side that is the intellectual difficulty. The intellectual difficulty is that when I walk habitually, I do not think of nothing. I know how to walk. So that's the first difficulty. It's to start to think of more than one thing at a time when you walk. It's not to walk with the idea, I'm going to walk with the upper torso forward, which is one idea, of course, because you will see on video that having an intention to, well, expand the rib cage in this way will never work. The person will not know what sort of movement is applied to the lower rib cage when he's accelerating the upper rib cage, but the camera is going to record everything, and it's going to be seen that when the person wants to, well, accelerate the upper torso, well, yes, we see that the aim is gained. We have now a vertical upper torso, yeah, but of course this has been gained by a complete collapse of the upper torso downward, and we can see that the lower sacrum has gone back in space. The person is crooked completely. So there is, in a sense, a success, but you must understand that this is not the success we are after. This is not, for us, increasing the thoracic capacity. This is not lengthening the spine. This is not, well, the kind of head forward and up that we are looking for. It's a first step. It's a first step to understand that the pupil will need more than one order in order to obtain the result. It's necessary to change the coordination of movements, of the different segmental movements of the rib cage and of the torso, and it's not possible to obtain it directly. So now, what Alexander is saying that certain muscles of the thoracic mechanism, which should take the lead in the performance of the breathing movements, remain entirely inert for the greater part of life, whilst others, which were never intended by nature to monopolize this particular act, but only serve as a relief or change, are used solely for the act of breathing. Hence arise a condition in which the posture, the symmetry of the body, the graceful normal curve of the whole frame suffer alteration and change. Yes, it's a fact that the person that you've been looking at the experiment was walking, but the person does not cease to breathe when walking. You breathe in walking, you breathe in sitting, you breathe in standing, you breathe all the time. So the increasing of the thoracic capacity is not just for a special act that we call breathing. The increasing of the thoracic capacity in our case is there to apply mechanical power to the straightening of the spine, which was not obtained when we were looking at this picture. On this picture, there is a start, of course, of applying mechanical power to the spine, but if you apply mechanical power on one side only, the type of rotation that you find is not forward and up. It's clearly forward and down. So it's necessary to understand that not all experiments are going to lead to a correct coordination of actions. The pupil is not to try and feel how an experiment is going, to try and remember how to elicit the same action by relying on his feeling again. This is not the process of conscious guidance and control. This is the process of the somatic teaching. And I consider that you cannot learn really with the somatic teaching, so there is not something else involved. So, again, Alexander considered that in our habitual coordination of the movements, there are defects. Let's continue the same paragraph. He says the capacity and mobility of the thorax, chest, are decreased. Its shape, particularly in the lumbar region, clavicle, and lower side of the chest, is changed in a harmful way. And the abdominal viscera are displaced, while the heart, lungs, and other vital organs are allowed to drop below their normal position. This is what he called the inadequate holding space of the thorax, which means a distinct lessening of the vital capacity and displacement of the vital organ. Let's look at another student of mine, to which I was explaining different way to intellectually represent the movement of the parts. So, for example, we are starting to discuss here what I presented last time, which is the sterno-mastoid line direction. So we create an intellectual object. The pupil only needs to have in mind the lower sternum spot and the back of the ear. We know that at the back of the ear there is an attachment on the bone of the cranium that is called the mastoid. And it's going to be very interesting because you will see that to open the airways, to open the tract, the tube that goes from the nose and mouth to the lungs, it's necessary to change the adjustment of the torso and neck in order to open the airways. We are here faced with what Alexander is describing here. The capacity and mobility of the thorax are decreased, especially the upper thorax. The upper torso is collapsed backward. I consider that this person, well, she's a teacher of student of the Alexander technique, but nevertheless, I told her that she's pulling the neck back in this picture, and that is just a geometrical consideration. We can see that at the moment she's got the abdomen forward and not the upper airways forward. That's obvious. Therefore, you can see that the ribs at the top are really deeply inclined forward. The first thoracic vertebrae, where the first rib is attached, is much higher. I had her feel the first thoracic and establish what is the direction of the collar. The first rib is in the shape of a collar. You can ask a person to set the thumbs on the top of the sternum and expand the index finger behind. Find first the seventh thoracic, which is the easiest to find, and just below that one there is the first thoracic vertebrae, so you can know exactly where is the start and where is the end of that first rib. Seen from the side, you know the inclination of the first rib. In this case, the inclination of the first rib is very, very steep. So there is a collapsed sternum. And the collapsed sternum will have many, many impacts. We know that the diaphragm cannot be stretched in this position. We know that the abdomen is protruding. There is no support either for the breast or for the spine. in this position. So this is what Alexander is describing here: inadequate holding space of the thorax and the lessening of the vital capacity. So of course, we are discussing a young person that is full of life. She's not an elderly person like me, but nevertheless, if she perseveres into this kind of organization of the movements of the segmental parts of the rib cage, she will have downs. Well, she will have highs, but she will have downs. And very often, people are not realizing that their way of resting, their way of sitting, of course, provide a feeling of rest, a feeling of release, a feeling of having a respite. But this is hiding the truth. The truth is that the natural activity of the part concerned is impaired. Or here Alexander is saying great factors in retarding the natural activity of the part concerned, which are therefore unable fully and naturally to perform their function. In these circumstances, the natural chemical change in the human organism cannot be adequate. Therefore, the person cannot be truly energetic. I'm not, you understand, I am not discussing breathing as such. I am discussing in fact, vital capacity. The vital capacity is not just the breathing capacity. It's also the distance between the rib cage and the pelvis, how you can elevate the distance between, of course, the chair and your rib cage in such a way as to permit for the abdominal region to function properly at the proper pressure. Most people have really insufficient abdominal pressure, and they suffer from it all their lives. So when I discuss these things with the pupil, the idea is not to bring shame or to say, well, you haven't learned anything valid. No, the idea is to start to envision how the person could take action and change the coordination of the movement that are responsible for this inadequate vital capacity. So with that person, I'm going to explain and use diagrams to show that it's her way of using the torso that is, for example, creating the double chin, because you can start to see, despite the number of lessons that this student has received from me, she's still shortening the distance between the chin and larynx. This is an indicator of the risk for a very marked double chin. Many ladies do not like, or men do not like double chin, and with reason. We have different reasons. She may not like a double chin for the same reason as me. For example, she would not like a double chin because it's a sign of aging, or it's a sign of eating too much. Well, I do not like the double chin for a completely different reason. That for me, a double chin means that the usual organization of the movements makes for a larynx that is very close to the chin, as we've already seen. If you remember, this is the position of the larynx that is indicated for swallowing, for closing the airways. So the person with a double chin, without knowing it, is making breathing very difficult, because instead of opening the pharynx, the person is completely closing the pharynx and creating incorrect stretch of the airways. This is really a bad idea, and with it, as you can see, we see a symptom that is always associated. It's a collapsed sternum. The first ribs that I've drawn on top of the image for the person to really represent what I was discussing. We know that the larynx is attached to the mastoid. We know that the sterno-mastoidian is attached to the mastoid. And so we see that that person is pulling her head down and pulling her head back without knowing it because of the incorrect internal capacity of our thorax that are in fact constructed by the different movements she's applying to sit. So from there we can imagine. So to imagine, I just made a collage. So what I've done, I've just taken the torso, cut the head off, rotated the torso so that, as you can see, it's very simple. The pupil will very clearly see that in the new organization, the sternum bone and the mastoid are in line. So that is easy to see. I want the person to have a clear idea of what is the aim of all these movements. And we want to see whether by directing the movements of the different segmental parts of the rib cage, the person could be seen to be like this. What I've also done, I have placed the head forward. And of course, I have, by drawing, I have lengthened the chin. I said, in fact, make a prediction saying, if you succeed in accelerating the upper rib cage faster than the middle rib cage, you'll have a rotation of the whole rib cage. As a result, the spine will you must understand that the rib cage or the thorax is made of the sternum, of the ribs, and of the spine. It's a complex system, and if you do apply with the ribs a mechanical action on the top that is different from on the middle, you get immediately a rotation of the rib cage object. That rotation of the rib cage object will of itself get the back, the upper torso forward, the neck to be free of the pull backward, and the head forward and up immediately. And I said, if you succeed into this, you will need not only to rotate the whole rib cage, but you will need also to rotate the upper ribs around the back and lift these ribs forward and upward. So we have a clear plan. If that is successful, we should be able to, in fact, control that the temple line is 90 degrees to the sterno-mastoid line. At the moment, this is only a collage. There is no reality. We are just trying to see into the future what could be the direction that we want the person to take with her directions of movements. Could she follow verbal instructions to direct the movement of the segmental part of the torso in order to obtain this? This is the idea. So, Alexander, elsewhere in the constructive conscious control, is now discussing exactly what I was explaining. For instance, suppose that a pupil has a special desire to increase his chest capacity. When I was showing this image, you must understand that rotating the rib cage is going to markedly change the bony shape of the back of the thorax, and if she succeeds in lifting the first ribs, it will of course expand the upper rib cage away from the lower rib cage, creating fantastic expansion of the thoracic capacity. So the idea is, yes, we have clearly a special desire to increase the chest capacity. Well, Alexander wants to, us to proceed with caution. He says, this desire acts as a stimulus to the psychophysical processes involved and sets in motion all the unreliable guiding and directing sensation associated with his established idea of chest expansion. You may ask yourself what it is we are discussing with established idea of chest expansion. Well, the first one and the most obvious, of course, is that for most people, chest expansion is associated with taking a deep breath, with deep breathing. Remember, Alexander said deep breathing is indeed a step in the right direction, but, and that explains why, at first, I do not ask the pupil to ever think that our idea of increasing the thoracic capacity has anything to do with breathing as such. At the moment, I'm not asking the pupil to take a deep breath, to move the lowest ribs back, and to move the upper ribs forward and up. It's absolutely obvious. For the moment, we are keeping completely within the range of movements that are associated with habitual gestures, like sitting, standing, leaning forward, leaning back, walking forward, walking backward, stepping. All these sorts of movements have something to do with the idea of chest expansion, but not with the established idea of chest expansion associated with taking a deep breath. I want the pupil to expand the chest, whether breathing in or breathing out. And in order to obviate that defect, the best thing is at first not to start with Whisper or with any procedures that involves clearly breathing. We will come to breathing as soon as the pupil knows how to organize the movements of the different segmental parts of the torso to expand the chest. When the chest is expanded, yes, then it's quite interesting, and it can be also a new step in the right direction to associate the expansion or the increasing of the thoracic capacity with breathing exercise, but certainly not as a starting point. The only way, then, by which he can prevent the old subconscious habits from gaining the upper hand is for him to refuse to act upon the idea of increasing the thoracic capacity. Yes, the pupil must refuse to act the idea of increasing the thoracic capacity, but you must understand what this means for Alexander. It's not abandoning the idea of increasing the thoracic capacity. Absolutely not. No, the idea is the means whereby idea is having the pupil work on the movements, the means whereby the thoracic capacity can be increased, and of which the pupil has no idea because of his, the condition of his kinesthetic systems. The pupil has no idea of the reality of his action. And I've tested so many teachers of the Alexander technique, specialists of somatic, have no more cognition of the movement they are really doing when they are leaning forward and when they are going to stand. And so as soon as the idea or desire comes to the person, he definitely stops and say to himself, no, I don't do what I should like to do to increase my chest capacity, because if I do what I feel will increase it, I shall only use my mechanism as I've used them before. And what is the good of that? I know I have been using them incorrectly up to now, else why do I need these lessons? In other words, he inhibits his desire to act. Okay. This said, that does not mean that the pupil must inhibit any desire to act. It's a completely different thing. That is, to act according to what he feels could provide the goods, could provide the end, or the desire to act with different orders of movements of the different parts of the rib cage, and of course mechanism of the arm, and certainly mechanism of the legs, in order to expand the thoracic capacity. This is what is going to be discussed with the teacher. So here is the student, and the student, as you see, has the hand placed on different parts of the rib cage. Well, yes, because knowing the difficulty of the pupil to perceive her own actions and to, in fact, think at the same time of two movements, this is necessary. This is necessary at first for the person to monitor the movements of her hands. So, for example, I can ask the person, could you please make space for the left hand to go back? Well, make space for the hand to go back is not a mystic direction. It's clear that the person needs to move the ribs, or the lowest ribs, the ribs that are under the lower sternum, backward in space, in order for the hand to be seen to move on camera. I'm not asking the person to pretend she's moving the ribs. No. I'm not asking the wish. I'm asking her to create the wish, but to give that wish, well, the lead in the different movements she's going to make in the next few seconds. And so she's asked to make space for the lower sternum to go back in space because the rib cage is moving, and she's asked at the same time to bring, of course, the upper torso forward. The game is simple at the moment. I'm asking her whether it's possible for her to rotate the rib cage object. And if it's possible, we should see on screen that the sternum suddenly should be vertical. There is a second question. We have already discussed the fact that depending on the center of rotation of that object rib cage, we could have two different outcomes. One could be if you suppose that the center of rotation of the rib cage is at the back, is close to the spine, and you rotate relatively to a spot that is close to the spine. This is the upper part of the rib cage. Let's imagine that you see just the start of the bottom of the rib cage. If the center of rotation is at the back, we can expect that the sternum is going to go down in space. Now, there is another possibility that we have explored with a very mechanical. We have taken a book and say that book is a rectangle. Look, if you set your finger at the front of the book and you incline, you unduly lift the front part of the chest. That's exactly the expression of Alexander. When you unduly lift the front part of the chest, Alexander says that you shorten the spine and you protrude the abdomen. This is exactly what we see here. We see, well, the start of it. It's not really marked, but it's already there. It's there. You cannot say, no, that person is really forward and up with the upper torso. Of course she's not. She's sitting with the middle torso and the abdomen compressed forward and down. So we discussed, and so I asked the person to just use these two intentions of movements, and only these intentions of movements. And I'm not sure that the person remembers at that time that we are discussing the increase of the thoracic capacity. The person does not need to know that, because this could introduce her habitual way of what she thinks is necessary to increase the thoracic capacity. I want none of it, so let's just go. And so the person creates the movement, and we see, obviously, I use these images for my lessons. I show to the pupil what has happened. I say to her, look, yes, you have moved your lowest ribs back. They have gone back in space. It's absolutely obvious. Yeah. We could say also that relative to that mark that is made here, we see that, well, there is very little movement of the upper torso. So we are not discussing here a rotation relatively to the lower sternum spot. Do you see the difference? There is this idea that it could be possible to rotate the whole object, and if you were to rotate that image, I hope I can do that. No, I can't. Oh, it's a shame. I should have prepared this better, so that to show you that if we rotate the rib cage around that spot, well, obviously the upper torso is going to go forward and up. Of course, if you rotate from a spot at the back, or if you do not rotate, because as a matter of fact, in this we see what Alexander was discussing. If you remember, he was saying a marked rigidity in the movement of the ribs and of the thorax. What you can see here is that the person has just moved the lower torso backward. There has been no movement of the upper torso forward. She has done it with the head. She has moved the lowest ribs back and the head forward. The head has moved forward not relatively to the lower sternum. No. It has moved forward relatively to the top. Therefore, When you move the head forward relatively to the top of the thoracic spine, you can only move forward and down. So the immediate result is to get the head forward and down. The person is still compressing the front of the chest very much. You cannot say that an expansion of the state has taken place. And it's much better for the person to know it, to know that her tendency when responding to the correct orders is to fail to implement all the orders simultaneously. It's better for the person to know that everything has not gone in the correct direction, and it's necessary for the person to analyze really movement by movement and well, couple of movement together, couple by couple of movement, in order to know where the direction of movement is going. Is it the one we want? Is it the movement we don't want to see? In this case, it's obviously the movement we don't want to see. Nothing has been gained. So any sort of feeling the person has had during that movement, I have had teachers telling me, wow, this is real lengthening of my back. I feel much, and I stop them and I say, no, we are not interested in what you feel, because the whole action is incorrect. The whole action is the old coordination with a twist. And so you cannot gain anything from the old coordination with a twist. With, a difference is that, of course, you can gain something, is some intelligence into your own actions. Your intelligence also into your own habits of movement, and think, okay, I thought I was really doing the two movements together. In fact, I was not. Could I use that new knowledge in order to create a new experiment, and maybe change the intentions so that they will correspond better with the instruction I've been given. So there are many things we can start, and the pupil then on the new experiment, as you can see on this one, it's already much better. We can see that something different has happened from the start. You see the movement of the part is much is much more organized. And the effect on the shape of the upper torso is much different. As we can see now, if you compare these two images, you will notice that suddenly the direction of the upper torso is much more forward and up relatively to the middle torso. And the person has started to gain some height between the lower sternum and the mastoid process. So this can be evaluated and fed into the intellectual preparation of the pupil. The pupil will now know that she wants to lengthen the distance between the lower sternum and the mastoid. Well, she wants to improve that distance when watching the next video. And so this is how the person is going to start organizing the movements more and more, getting more movement of the lower torso, more movement. For the moment, is the movement of the upper torso we are interested with. And she's starting to, I asked her just to note where was the cleidomastoid muscle, the muscle that relates the clavicle and, well, the base of the ear, which is the mastoid, because it was seen that when she was rotating and starting to play with the idea of lifting the upper torso forward, in fact, on screen, what I could see is that the shoulder was lifting. And you must understand that the connection of the shoulder with the torso is through the clavicle bone. And the clavicle bone is clavicle is the root of clavicle is cleido. So when we talk about cleidomastoid muscle, we are discussing a muscle that is connecting the mechanism of the arm with the mechanism of the neck and head, and therefore it was necessary for that person to start to discover that lifting the torso could be or the movement of lifting of the torso could be disconnected to the lifting of the shoulder. It's not the case on this image. Yeah, we can see that there is a bulging cleidomastoid muscle here. And so it will be necessary for the person to start to integrate more of the mechanism of the arm, because when she's lifting the torso at the moment, this association is not the one we want. If she's lifting the upper arm without knowing it, well, she's obviously using the cleidomastoid muscle, and when she's pulling the arm up, she's pulling the head down. So we continue to explore what are the movements we want to see, what are the movements that are not wanted, and as a result, the pupil is starting to understand what is involved in expanding the thoracic capacity. And the thoracic capacity is seen to be changing, and the position of the lower sternum is not anymore in front of the head. The head starts to be forward, and it starts to be up. Well, there is still a very marked sternocleidomastoid muscle to see on the side of the neck, but this is work in progress. And the pupil will start to have clear geometrical representation of what it is we want the different means whereby orders to obtain, and what it is we want to inhibit. This is, well, a sort of idea of how to teach the conscious guidance and control of the expansion of the rib cage. Well, it's the start of it, at least.
When Alexander says vigor, he's talking then about the sort of, when people think of vigor, they think of energy. Like he's talking about movement, not a feeling of vigor.
Oh, yes.
So like, yeah, so it's not like when he talks about vigor, he's talking about the vigor of the movements that you can see. And obviously he's looking at them as a teacher, or he's looking at himself in the mirror. We're using video. If someone's chasing the feeling of vigor, then they won't be doing the movements, because they're, it's not the same thing. There may be a feeling of vigor that comes later from having the vigor of the movements, but if you try to get that directly, you would be completely in the wrong path. Yes. And in the beginning, you probably don't feel more vigorous at all. In fact, you don't. You feel like tense when you're doing the movements for the first time. You have to feel tense, or it feels difficult. It doesn't feel like you have more energy. But if you look on the video, you can actually see there was more energy, vigor of the movements.
Yes. So thank you for saying this. I forgot, but it's absolutely fundamental to understand that, yes, we are not asking the person to have vigorous ideas or to feel vigorous in any way. The vigor is the capacity of moving one movement in the direction we want and to reach far. So when the person is starting to be able to expand the free end of the ribs away from one another, and that is shown on screen, yes. So for example, the person you've just seen was, for me, the epitome, or showing the image of what we mean by vigor. She has really expanded the rib cage, because the movements can be measured, and we can say, wow, compared to her habits, compared to her collapse, well, she's really shown vigor in her movements.
And there's no direct relationship between the feeling of it anyway, because sometimes it feels the opposite of vigor, and then another time it might feel nothing at all. And if you're able to do new movements for a while, you might not feel anything at all. So if you're going by the feeling of it, you won't get anywhere at all.
Yes, recently I had an experiment like this that ended with the pupil writing a letter to me, saying that she could see on the video that she was expressing vigor and movements as never before, and she said, "Why is it that I am so sad? I am depressed. I know I'm feeling depressed." That was, and so you must understand that, well, of course, we are dealing with a sensible subject here, because you have the airways. The airways are connected directly with the fascia of the neck, with the fascia of the torso. There is the thyroid that is around there. It's a gland that is very important for the mood changes. And of course, as the person is changing the stretches that are encompassing all the region of the tissues and fascias that are part of this fundamental system. The fundamental immune system is directly linked with the fascia. The nerves and all the tubes are directly embedded in these protective fascias. So as you start showing vigor in movements, the change are quite steep. And all sorts of emotions or can reach from it. I do not take much heed on that, you know. I do not say, oh yeah, it's a great release. You have released some traumas, or you have all this sort of talk that you hear sometimes. Or I just say, check on video to see if all the movements are fine. Are they? And you can, whether you're feeling sad or depressed or not, you can discover that you can have your normal activity no matter what the feeling is. And let's see how the feeling is going to evolve in the next few days. One thing is, you are not going to feel expanded when you expand. You're not going to feel at rest when you expand. At first, you will find that, well, 20 seconds later, you're back into your old collapsed self. So where you feel nice, where you feel ebullient, where you feel what you are habitually. So you need to take a view into the midterm or long term, and you will weather all these strange emotions and moods that are coming from exerting vigor in motion. It is true, exerting vigor in motion is going to change your outlook. It's going to provoke some feelings, some moods. Yes, but they will not stay.
Okay, brilliant. So for people watching, you'll get a link underneath to book a lesson with Jeando. You'll find his email address and his Facebook link. And we'll see you in the next video. Thanks, Jeando.
Thanks, Kevin.